guys, welcome back to Lives Vivas. Today's question is, how did the medieval university emerge as a powerful force in society? So although we have an idea of what college looked like and what college is, medieval universities developed from religious educational institutions. The university systems emerged as a powerful force due to its secular ability to unite a highly divided continent. My 3 points today are going to be that it emerged from a wide variety of sources, that it established a uniform system of academic credentials, and 3, it spread due to its enormous economic and political developments that it created. So my first point is that the medieval universities emerged from a wide variety of different sources that became central institutions of medieval Europe. So, there's 3 different phases that we kind of think of when you think of college today. You can get your bachelor's, your master's, or your doctorate. And so that's kind of like the 3 terms that they use today. But back then in medieval history time, they used the terms apprentice, journeyman, and master. So, apprentice would study under a master, and journeyman, whatever. Okay, so Charlemagne kind of starts the beginning of education system, and he wants it to be available to everybody, whether you were poor or rich or woman or a man or whatever. He wanted everybody to be able to be educated because he was not educated and he could not read or write, and so he really valued education. So around 1000 AD, a simplified version of trivium and quadrivium formed, and trivium was the study of grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and quadrivium was the study of math, music, and astronomy. So they're both very different, but they're both, widely needed. So these kind of terms, I just threw my Viva. Sorry, my hair's really messy. Okay. So these kind of terms come about, and basically, so Charlemagne sadly does not get to finish his vision with the educational systems, but in 1079, Pope Gregory the 7th, continues Charlemagne's ideas and continues his development of the educational systems. So if you look back to the medieval times, we kind of think of, medieval students must have loved school since they were it was so valued, because a lot of people didn't have it. But students even back then kind of had a hard time being in school and wished that they were not in school. So we can see an example of this through a Persian student in the 1200s. He or she wrote a poem about how miserable school was. So the student is complaining about lodging in this poem, food, the hard bed, waking up early, doing school, all that kind of fun stuff that us students have to do. So this is a quote from the poem, and it's, quote, "He is not rejoicing in the days of his youth, and has no hope even of happiness in the future," end quote. And so this is from this Persian student who just literally gave up all hope of ever finding happiness because school was rough. But it is highly valuable. So my second point is that the medieval universities established a uniform system of academic credentials which allowed for a pan-European intellectual culture. So people, if you think about studying now, usually we color code, we have songs, we have motions, there's different things we do, but people back then actually did this thing called marginali. So they would read a paragraph or whatever they were doing, and then they would take down a dictation, and then they would add commentary. And so this is where we get like margin and writing in the margin and stuff like that. And so if you look, it will be like, you know, the student has copied down his work and then he has taken his notes in the margins. So this is how they kind of learned. Once education specialization merged, students began to go across the continents to go to school, and this was really valuable because it not only advanced them educationally, it also allowed them to become more culturally and socially diverse and develop those skills. So a typical day of a student, or the beginning of it, was they would kind of wake up at 5 and they would go to chapel at 5:30. Then they would go to church at 6, and then they would start with their first classes with a professor. Then they would have lunch and read the Bible during this lunch, and that's kind of like the beginning part of their day. So it was very organized, very structured. And yeah, so there were 2 kinds of classes that students took. One was ordinary, and the other was quaternary. So the first one was taught by professors, and the second one was taught by students. Maybe they were journeymen or masters of that specific subject. So yeah. But basically, the system that they developed, it was not like the college that we think of today, but college was more of just a place where that they offered tests. So you didn't really take classes at college, you would just take tests at college. But the classes were kind of training you to take the test. So students would find a professor to help them prepare for the tests, and that's why they would go to classes. So this is kind of like the SAT or the ACT. Peter Abelard, he was kind of a famous professor of this time period, and he really he wanted the thrill and the excitement and the adrenaline in a classroom environment. So instead of having your basic lecture, he decided to get the students to debate. And so this really became really popular, and it was just a really great thing that they introduced to the classroom. So Walter Paston was an Oxford student, and we actually have some letters that are going between him and his mom. And so Walter, it's just kind of a funny little story, but Walter has this priest travel with him to and from college, and that's kind of how someone could make money, is just do your laundry, make your bed, be your servant, basically. And so Walter has this priest going with him, and so his mom tells him not to commit to priesthood because she's like, you're gonna find a nice girl, you're gonna get married, and you're gonna have some kids, so do not commit yourself to priesthood, because then you can't do any of that. So he doesn't, and he goes through his studies, and he graduates, and so he sends some letters back home saying, oh, I graduated, and no one comes to his graduation. So he graduates though, and then on his way home, he actually never goes home, and he gets sick, and he dies. And so it's just kind of a sad little story, but you see all these letters from there, which is really interesting. So Harold Bierman says, or quotes, quote, the establishment of a uniform class of university-educated scholars helped European leaders to solve disputes that existed between various jurisdictions, end quote. So again, this organized form of education just really advanced Europe and unified Europe as a whole. So my third and final point is that the medieval university spread due to its enormous economic and political development it created. It increased human capital, so it trained people with useful skills that they would use during everyday jobs. It encouraged the foundation of networking. So again, just by also becoming culturally and socially educated as well as brain educated, it really advanced some of those skills and gave people connections. And it trained lots of people in the canon and civil law. So canon and civil law training was super important. Universities developed this formal legal institutions through the canon, and they trained lawyers, they codified laws and regulations, and they became administrators and guided others through the legal system that they had made, kind of. So they used the Roman law too, and this was significantly better than some of the pre-existing legal systems, just because the Roman law was very universal, and it was not super formal, but it was more of a formal law than the customary laws, which were more local and kinsmanship. Yeah. So yeah, basically, instead of having a feud with your friend, you would have to go to court and solve it, because that's always the best way to work out your problems. So the judges made more, and they were able to make judges have more of a precise, clear judgment based off of kind of the laws. So this, you can see this through the travel privileges of the universities. So non-native students who traveled to universities it was really dangerous, because if they, whether they were traveling or just staying on campus, it was just kind of crazy. So they had to have supplies sent to them from home, so they would have a messenger come and bring them their stuff, and the messenger would often get robbed on the roads and stuff. Also, just being like a non-native student, a lot of people, if they got into a fight or something happened between them and another student, and that student was a local student, they would already have kind of win, because they were local and the non-native wasn't. So in 1158, though, Friedrich I gave certain privileges to these travelers and non-natives. So he basically just says, if anybody causes injury to a student or messenger, they shall have to appear before the professors or the bishop. And these penalties were not light. They were very heavy, very serious. So people were afraid. Good job, Friedrich. So to end this out, we are going to end it with a quote from Norman Yakaman. And it says, quote, "The late Middle Ages saw a resurgence of economic activity in Europe. New cities were formed, old cities grew, the volume and the scope of trade expanded and reached new heights," end quote. So this view is really long, but although we often think of universities and college as a set thing and as a very normal thing, medieval universities developed from religious education institutions, and the university system emerged as a powerful force due to its secular ability to unite a highly divided continent. And my 3 points again were that it emerged from a wide variety of sources, it established a uniform system of academic credentials, and it spread due to its enormous economic and political developments that it created. So thank you for watching this. It's a long one. Hope you have a better week than me. Bye.